I'm Lisa, and I'm the mom half of this duo.
And I'm Shada. I'm Lisa's daughter. And welcome to Two Peas in a Plot, our little corner of the internet where we talk all things books.
We read across genres and love everything from underrated gems to longtime favorites.
And just a quick heads up, while we try to avoid spoilers, we do talk about what we liked or didn't, so there might be a few light spoilers along the way just to give you some context.
So if you love stories and want to grow your TBR, hit that subscribe button and join the plot. Hey, we're back, and I have a new type of genre to read or to discuss that I read. The book is called Spitfires, and the author is Becky, I think it's Aikman or Aikman. It's Aikman. And it was published this year in 2025. And it's about the American women who flew in the face of danger during World War II. They actually flew for Britain because they weren't, I think America hadn't joined the war yet, but they were also women flyers who wanted to continue flying, or they were instructors, or they were also, what would you call it, more acrobatic. They would be on the end of the wing, and do stunts that way. So they wanted to continue flying, and that's where they were able to fly planes they would normally not be able to. And I found it very interesting. It's about 25 women, and I think they follow more like nine of them throughout the book. They flew up to 147 different aircraft models, from Typhoons to Spitfires. I think that's where they get the name, but also I feel the women were kind of Spitfires themselves. They were just really independent, and back then their only way of independence was in marriage rather than work a lot of times. And especially to continue flying, that would have been really hard to do. So I really enjoyed it. It doesn't talk about the war so much. It talks about some of the effects of war that obviously happened to the pilots and to the country in Britain, not so much America, because it is focusing on them living in a different country and supporting those flyers. And then America eventually gets involved. Then they saw American pilot working on the same airfield that they were in Britain. And I think that's my brief synopsis. I tend to talk too much, and I don't know, Shada, if you had any questions for me. I
Well,
know
I know
it's.
we talked a little
Mhm.
bit about the book yesterday, and you had some really interesting little, first of all,
Oh,
historical tidbits, but
yes.
then some of the personal stories about like these women were, some of them were super rough and tumble. I wanted to ask you, were their missions really dangerous, and were they actually flying into active combat zones, or were they doing more like reconnaissance? What types of missions were these women doing?
That's a very good question. Now, I have a hard time explaining what they did, but it was just really they were only ferrying. They called it ferrying transport. I they didn't fight in the war per se, but they were integral. Is that correct? If I'm saying it right. In moving planes that come in from pilots, and they take a, let's just call it a base, but they were really short for, they were called ATA, Air Transport Auxiliary, and they would ferry planes. So they didn't really go over to Europe, but they stayed like in Scotland. I'm not sure Ireland if I heard that, but they would fly the planes, I think, from base to base. But these were planes, some they'd never flown for the first time they're flying, and they would have problems with them. And that's how a few of the pilots died. One in particular, she was a good pilot, and she loved flying, but her propeller flew off. And I didn't think of this, but as she's flying, the propeller flies off, but because it goes so fast originally when they're in the air, that they don't know it's off. because they can't see it. So she's having trouble with the plane, they imagined, and she's trying to land the plane as best she can. She doesn't quite know why she's losing air. But anyway, she makes a landing, but she doesn't have enough room to land the plane. And I think she hits the barn and goes up in the air. And she sees this one boy as she's flying in. The only reason why you know that is the boy was interviewed later and he never forgot her face.
Oh,
It was
wow.
so dramatic because I think they were trying to say, I don't know if they blamed her. When you wreck a plane, they either got in trouble for pilot error, and after so many pilot errors, you're kicked out. You lose your contract, or it was a mechanical issue. A lot of times they were mechanical issues.
Well, if the propeller flew off, yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds like a mechanical, like really
Yeah.
big mechanical issue.
Yes.
Wow.
But the women were pretty tough and independent, and I know there was one story I was telling you yesterday about this one woman. I don't want to repeat their names because there were so many that I would get confused, but she would ride her motorcycle back from the bar and she just fell over in a ditch and went to sleep. I think she got a concussion though, but I think that might have been the only time she didn't make it the next day to fly out her planes that she was assigned to. They have different class levels. Like you pass certain class one, you can fly these planes, and then you go up in levels. But I think someone found her on the side of the road and helped her home. But yeah, they had colorful lives, and but they were all very unique. There were a few I think I resonated with more. One had heart trouble, but in the U.S., she would have never made the military. But I keep saying Britain, but I don't know if it's wrong to say England, but in Britain, she was able to fly. She was just said, "Oh no, that happens all the time," you know. But she was actually ended up. I shouldn't say, but I will. It doesn't give too much away. At the very end of the book, they tell a little synopsis of the women when they came back to the United States, and one person, this pilot, did not live long. She died in her 50s due to heart issues. So, but she enjoyed flying the years that she could, and she was a really good flyer.
I'm thinking like I don't think you could have a pilot's license now if you had a
No,
documented history of heart
yeah, you
issues.
have to have a. They did have physicals, but somehow she just got away of passing. I don't know how. I think they were really in need of pilots. That's why they put out this notification to any American women who wanted to come fly.
And they flew a bunch of different types of planes. Did they have training on all these planes, or it was just kind of like you said, they have a certain class, and that means they can fly everything under that umbrella class, whether or not they actually have experience with it.
From
So
You're right. From I think they would get tested on certain ones, but sometimes I don't know what their testing meant, if it was just written, but sometimes they said they flew a certain plane for the very first time. I mean, they flew bombers,
that's so
big
cool.
heavy planes, and I just think how scary. And you wouldn't think this was a factor normally, but where they were flying the planes had a lot of different weather that they weren't used to in their flying in the states, in whatever state they lived in. There was a lot of weather issues, fog, and they weren't supposed to use their instrument panels, and sometimes they'd have to use them so they say they'd go up above the clouds and they'd wait for a breakthrough to come down to land the plane, but they couldn't find a breakthrough. It was constant fog, and I think a few times they had used their flying instruments so they could find out how to land the plane safely, but they weren't always taught those details, the panel.
That's
I
terrifying that
know
they
they
had
were
to
just
do that.
they were awesome. And then this one pilot, I think her name was Helen Ritchie. She was once Amelia Earhart's co-pilot, and I know people
Wow.
have heard of Amelia Earhart. So they were really interesting women. I think it's very worth a read. But I don't know if you have any more questions for me, Shada, but I know we talked about yesterday. I was so impressed. Not impressed, I guess kind of unbelievable is the word that these things didn't happen till later on in our life after World War II. That crossing the sea to England all those years ago, the young pilots were transported into a dream of the future. Afterward, the world struggled to catch up, and I'm reading from the epilogue. And it's not giving anything away because I'm not being specific, and these things weren't in the story. But the first woman to pilot a plane for a major U.S. passenger carrier was Bonnie Taberzi, and excuse me if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, at American Airlines in 1973. And then in 1993, that Jenny Flynn flew the first fighter in the U.S. Air Force. And around the same time, Eileen M. Collins blasted off as the first woman space shuttle pilot. And no woman served as the CEO of a major American airline until Joanna Garrity took over JetBlue in 2024. And forget about equal pay. Women everywhere still struggle for what the ATA women won. And that's true. The ATA women, they had equal pay to the men. I don't think right away, but soon after they had equal pay.
That
And they were
is,
well respected too from the men pilots. They couldn't believe it at first, but
oh, that's really cool. Some
yeah,
solidarity with the other pilots.
right. Yeah. It's a really good read. And I think you wanted to read it, Shada.
Yeah, it sounds really, really interesting. And I think too, I I know I've always heard this and I haven't actually dived into the history of it, but like World War II was kind of a liberating time for women because all
Hmm.
the men were away. So all of these opportunities opened up for women. And it is kind of disappointing to see how those opportunities sort of went away when everyone came back and the war was over. I know we had kind of a 1950s Rockwell golden age, like economically in the US after World War II, but yeah, a lot of that stuff went away. I mean, women couldn't have credit cards until the 70s, like
Yeah,
outside of their husbands' names. What in the world?
I know.
So it's exciting. I think, and what you said too in that brief bit from the epilogue, that like a glimpse into the future, but then it was all rolled back. So I'm glad we're making some headway, but yeah,
Hmm.
it seems like a really exciting time to have been a woman and especially a pilot.
Right. And to reinvent yourself. No one knows you. And I just thought that was really interesting. Well, that's all we have for us. And I hope you enjoyed the book and maybe pick it up. And if you do, let us know if you enjoyed it. Otherwise, we appreciate you hanging out with us. Thanks for being here and talking books with us.
And if you love stories and want to grow your TBR, hit that subscribe button and join the plot with us in the next chapter. Bye, y'all.
Bye.